These amendments, in the name of my party colleague Deputy Jennifer Whitmore, adds a much-needed definition of just transition. It's regrettable that in Ireland we still do not have a definition of a just transition in legislation. Without a legal definition, it's difficult to see how we can achieve a fair and just transition as we move towards a zero-carbon economy, or to hold the government of the day to account for their climate actions. To put it simply, a just transition is a movement towards a new, greener, sustainable economy that is done so in as fair and as inclusive a way as possible to everyone concerned, particularly to those most vulnerable to a transition to a zero-carbon economy, or those who are most vulnerable to climate change itself. The idea of a circular economy in the current economic context is positive, but we must also be cognizant of and focused on how this new economy will treat people, particularly those who are most vulnerable in our society. It is a question of whether we include them or view them as passive actors during the course of this transition. We have an opportunity to change this by adopting a more holistic transitional approach for people in poverty or with a disability, recognising the opportunity to drive social change along with climate action. Deputy Whitmore has attempted to secure a legal definition of just transition throughout the course of the Climate Action Bill and in her own legislation, which she introduced last year. She also introduced this definition in this bill at committee stage, but it was again rejected by government. We can no longer separate the environment from how we live. We can't separate it from every single element that impacts us, including food costs, fuel costs and travel. It's so cross-cutting, our responses, and the legislation and policies we develop have to take into account all of those other sectors.
I don't believe, and I won't be accepting, as the other deputy said, that this is the place for us to focus on or set the definition of a just transition. We had this discussion at quite length in the development of the climate law, but we will again later this year. We are working on the introduction of a statutory Just Transition Commission office. I had meetings actually this week with Just Transition Alliance and with a whole range of different actors asking very detailed questions. Well, how do we define that work there? That's the right place to define a Just Transition Commission or a Just Transition approach in its own right. I don't believe this is the appropriate place, and I don't think it would strengthen or add to the legislation. So on this occasion, I'm afraid we can't accept the amendments.
The question then is, how stands amendment number 1? Are you pressing the amendment? Deputy Kearns is pressing the Chakti Tar Heavy Tarishkina Abradish Thaw. In Gwynna Abradish Neil. Estonian Gul Butcher in case to believe the question is defeated. Vote all. All right.
The Circular Economy Waste Management Amendment and Minerals Development Amendment Bill 2022, report stage amendment number 1 in the name of Deputy Jennifer Whitmore. The question is that the amendment be made, and on that question a division has been challenged. Tellers Thaw, Deputy Holly Kearns and Deputy Roisin Shortall, Neil, Minister Jack Chambers and Deputy Brendan Griffin.